Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Ian Bruce and this is Interviews from Quito, the program where we explore some of the big challenges facing this country and the region. In today's program, Ecuador's cinema is not well known even in Latin America, but the number of films being made here has increased significantly in recent years, even though they're still struggling to draw an audience. Why is that? What needs to be done? To talk about this, we're very pleased to have with us Camilo Luzuriaga. He's a well-established filmmaker himself. He's also the head of the INCINE film school and one of the founders of the country's best-known art cinema, OCHOYMEDIO, or 8.5, named, of course, after the classic Fellini film. But first, let's take a look at this short clip.
Yo una vez vi una película en la que la gente estaba en una estación de autobuses que se encontraba en la mitad de la nada, no podían salir.
Since the 80s, the amount of films made in Ecuador increased from one each 1 or 2 years to an average of 2 made each year, starting since 1990. Nonetheless, the success achieved with audiences or economically didn't follow the same pace. None of the movies made and displayed in local cinemas has even recovered their production costs, and critics in their own country have not given positive reviews.
I've just seen very little of it, and it didn't catch my attention. The plots are supposed to be about social issues, but they are stereotypical. A little bit of tears, the typical conflict, and very attached to our daily routines. They only reveal the ugly side of our society, and I don't like that.
The National Institute for the Creation of Films and Audiovisuals has shared around $1 million each year into different categories, which still doesn't sound like enough to make quality products. Although the real problem doesn't seem to be related to money, but with the contents of each movie.
I think that money could improve our films, but I don't think the problem is that. It is not the essence of it. I think one solution could be to educate more scriptwriters. I know people here that have produced in this country, and when they start, they hire local writers, but later they end up hiring people from Colombia.
In spite of the lack of a solid industry, many new filmmakers graduate each year from different film schools, like INCINE.
I'm very attracted to cameras, to storytelling coming from a certain point of view, your own point of view. Everything has already been told, so what changes the game is the own point of view of each author. I'm also interested in working in movies to show to the world, and not just Ecuador. For example, the funding you find here asks you to talk about typical Ecuadorian issues in order to recognize your movie as Ecuadorian, and I don't agree with that. If the movie is filmed here with Ecuadorian people, then it already is Ecuadorian. So we should try to tell stories that all the people can relate to, but here the topics limit the audience inside our own borders.
The hope is that proper education can change the ways of making films in Ecuador, in order to create products not only for local audiences, but also for the world.
Camilo, thank you so much for coming in. As we said, not many people outside Ecuador know much about the Ecuadorian film industry. Probably not many of our audience have seen an Ecuadorian film. So maybe you could just start by giving us a brief outline of how the cinema industry is developed in Ecuador and what its particular characteristics are.
It's a brand new industry. It started, I think, no more than 15 years ago. The year I usually use is the 2000.
Let me just stop you there, because you mean there's no sort of prehistory of Ecuadorian cinema?
Yes, there's a prehistory, a primitive part of our history during the whole 20th century, with eventually one premiere film, a TV show, but not what we have after the 2000. It's a regular production. A regular production is what eventually delivers an industry, ends in an industry. And we are now in that path towards the industrialization of Ecuadorian audiovisual and cinema.
So why did it begin at the beginning of this millennium?
Why we didn't start before, like the Americans, like Mexicans, like Argentinians, right? Yeah, I think it's a characteristic of our country. Our country got into the modern times around half of the last century, towards the 1950s, 60s, when our country definitely got into a capitalization of the society, leaving back the feudal times. You know? So it took 50 years that society got to a point to need a local cinema, and also have enough professionals, enough resources, enough audience, enough market to start financing an industry.
How does it fit then into the context of Latin American cinema? What are its similarities? What are its similarities or dissimilarities?
Mainly the lingua franca, the Spanish, mainly that, because in everything else we are different. Yeah, for instance, Mexico, because of this close love and fight relation with the United States, Mexico started very early in national cinema. Yeah. And also because of that strong nationalistic revolution of 1910.
And a strong state, of course.
And a strong state with a market, with an audience, plenty viewers to finance a local industry. Mexican cinema took power over the whole Spanish-speaking continent during the 30s, 40s, 50s, up to the 60s. The power of Hollywood film, the North American industry, started in the 70s. Before then, Mexican film was around the country, Latin American film, even Brazilian, European film, plenty of European films in Latin America.
So you mean people before the 50s were watching more Mexican films, other Latin American films than Hollywood films?
Definitely. Yeah. The Mexicans had the Latin American market and the Ecuadorian market. I'd say 2 out of 3 films were Mexicans. Now the relation is that 48 out of 50 films are North Americans. So
48 out of 50?
Yeah, actually it's 98%.
This is in Ecuador or across Latin America?
In Ecuador, but the situation is more or less in the rest of Latin America. Mexico is a bit different, but even so in Mexico, North American industry has around between 90 to 95% of the market in cinema. Yeah.
I want to come back to this issue of the market and the audiences and so forth in a moment, but just going back to the character of Ecuadorian cinema, in these 15 years, 20 years that it's developed as a serious industry, if you like, has it acquired specific characteristics, themes, a specific aesthetic?
Well, we are in that trend, in that job, to find our seal, our local sign, our difference. Yep, we are in that. Yeah, I think that we don't have yet found a strong identity, like for instance Mexican films did in the 30s, the 40s. So you could realize this is Mexican
as soon as you see it.
As soon as you see it. Same happened with the Argentinian industry, and still now, you see an Argentinian film and you say, this is Argentina. We are in that.
But why is that? What gives it that quality?
The quality is a relation of the know-how, the expertise, which comes from Europe, the language, the audiovisual language, the cinema language, wasn't developed in our cultural environment. It came from Europe and nowadays from the United States and Great Britain, yeah, which is very strong in the local production. I always say about this axis, which is LA, Los Angeles, New York City, and London. The North American industry still has a very strong relation with the London industry.
London, really? I would have guessed that Latin American cinema owed much more to Italian or French cinema than
I'm
to...
referring about North American industry.
Okay.
Yeah, and they developed a strong personality. No? In our case, in Ecuador, we don't have yet found strong relations. For instance, we could develop it with with Bogota, for instance, with Caracas, maybe with Lima, maybe with La Paz, and together develop a market, a bigger market than Ecuador. Developing a market means finding a mirroring effect with the audience. So the films we produce must have a strong reaction from the audience. In that point, we can speak about an industry, a local industry. We haven't arrived yet to that point.
But you talk about this influence from Europe or in the language. I remember a great Brazilian film critic, you may know this, Paulo Emilio Salles Gomes, who once said that everything in Brazilian cinema is copied from outside. Our salvation is that we copy very badly.
Well, you know that copying is the way that creation works. It's the only way. The same as when we are kids, when we are starting life, we learn how to live, how to speak, the cultural relations, the cultural signs by copying. That's the way we learn. Art works in exactly the same way, by copying. I call this the Frankenstein effect, because we copy from this little bit, from this other bit, from the reality this bit, this mixture finally reaches a genre. In English, what? Genre.
Genre. We use the French word in English.
Genre,
the genre,
French,
yeah.
Once we find that, then we have found a strong relation with the audience.
And that combination produces something new.
Yeah, finally we arrive to a personality, to a national personality of our films. We are, as I told you, we are in that trend, because it's not easy. It takes time. It takes decades. I believe, because I'm positive about our cinema, I think that we are definitely in that trend. In the next 5 to 10 years, we will find, we will have already a local personality.
So apart from that question of developing a personality, what are the main obstacles to making a film in Ecuador?
Well, until the 2000 was the lack of professionals, the know-how, the expertise. Now we have enough professionals, almost in all duties. Yeah. Besides that, the experience, because it's a matter of trial and error. See, it's the only way of reaching a professional, the professional look, the professional appearance that the audience now demands. Now, what we need is a market. The problem we have is that Ecuador, first of all, it's taken by the North American industry. Yeah. And it's difficult to fight in the venues, in the Salty cinema, in the cinemas, with that experience, with that strength of the North American films. And the audience is not willing, is not, doesn't want to be pity with the Ecuadorian films. Oh, we are going to see this film because it's Ecuadorian, we need to support it, let's support them. No, that's not the point of view of the audience. The audience pays and they want a good product. Yeah? They, in a way, they want us, filmmakers, to behave, to have the quality the North Americans have. Obviously, speaking about the Ecuadorian problems, the Ecuadorian culture, the Ecuadorian face, the Ecuadorian sound, the Ecuadorian way of speaking. They want both things at the same time. That quality they are used to, and the local personality.
But I think I'm right in saying that one of your early films, La Tigra, is still the Ecuadorian film with the biggest box office. Maybe it's been overtaken now, but it was for a long time.
Actually, it's the second.
Second, okay.
Dos para el Camino, Two for a Road, a 1980 film, still has the hit. 500,000, 500,000 viewers. Dos para el Camino. And La Tigra is 250,000, 256,
still a
which
big audience for an Ecuadorian film.
Yeah,
so how did you manage that? Right back in 1990, which was before this.
Well, La Tigra was appeared in 1990. we were surprised. We had that film has the honor to have beaten Batman, which was the blockbuster in that year. That means that an Ecuadorian film now must have 2 million viewers, because the actual blockbusters like Rápidos y Furiosos,
Fast and Furious.
Fast and Furious, which was last year the blockbuster. It's more than 1 million viewers in Ecuador, I'm speaking, no? 12.
Because the audience is much bigger, of course.
Yeah. So, in relation, La Tigra made close to 2 million viewers.
But why did that happen? How could you do that at that time?
I say two things. The lack of Ecuadorian films in that year, because we premiered one film every 10 years. So I benefited of like, how can I say it, a repressed audience that for 10 years hasn't seen an Ecuadorian film. So they were hungry to see an Ecuadorian film. Yeah, first of all. Second of all, that I learned later, I studied more and more with my experience, that with intuition, I use an archetype taken from the Ecuadorian literature, a character that La Tigra, which is a macho in a female body. That's La Tigra. Yeah? Nowadays, you can see in the industry films, that's an archetype very popular. Women behaving like machos, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that was it. But in the peasant area, not in the city, not in the modern times, in the peasant area. Actually, in the province of Manabí, which in Ecuador is a very popular province, famous for everything. It wasn't a thought that hit. It was a result of intuition and circumstances. Hard to repeat. It hasn't been repeated. Not even myself have repeated that success.
You must have a lot of specific stories about problems you faced, you know, making the films and drawing an audience over the years.
Definitely.
Do you have one or two you could tell us?
Well, for instance, in La Tigra, we had to create the technology, a matter of budget and lack of equipment, lack of experiences. For instance, that what I see in this set, that's a dolly. There wasn't any dolly in Ecuador. Not even the TV stations had a dolly.
Actually, this one our technicians made themselves. So that's
I see it, and it works perfectly.
And it works very well.
It works perfectly. So we had to build a dolly, not only a straight dolly, but a circular dolly. There wasn't a crane. So we built a crane. After the production, a local TV station bought us the dollies and the cranes. The camera has to be fixed. It was a regular 16mm camera in Escuela Politécnica Nacional, which is a local university, for $100. An engineer transformed it to Super 16, which was the lowest standard needed to hit the big screen, because regular 16 didn't have enough definition. Well, that fact about technology, but I can say the same about acting. And acting, which we didn't really know how to handle it, about makeup.
Did Ecuador have a strong theatrical tradition before that?
Not at all. That's one problem. For instance, the American industry stands strongly over the Shakespearean dramatic tradition. That's why I think I speak about the link. New York City is the link between LA, which is the industry, the businessman, and the know-how of the dramatic know-how, which comes from London. Yeah? We don't have that tradition in Ecuador. We didn't have. We are building this tradition. Nowadays, in Quito and in Guayaquil, there's a growing theater movement. Plenty of actors and theater sals are open regularly. So we are building the tradition in the dramatic expertise, which means acting and drama writing, and also in the language, the cinematographic language.
I mean, the number of films produced in Ecuador has increased quite dramatically recently. You know, I think last year there were 27 feature films made or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
How important has been the role of the state in promoting that?
Unfortunately, I have to say that it has played a role, but a very little role. And I can measure it in dollars. The state has invested $1 million a year to support the local production, which is nothing for an industry. In comparison, the Argentinian government, the last years, previous, I think it's the actual government, there was a change after with the new government. But in the last years of the previous government, the Argentinian state invested 180 million a year. Spain is around
for a
500.
That has what?
60.
2 or 3 times the population?
That you are correct. So in relation, and we have said that, the local state must have invested $60 million a year. Money is not the only thing, but it helps.
But so how did those 27 films get financed here?
Oh, that's the problem. They are low-budget films. And because of that, the trend is to hire amateurs, people that don't charge, that are ready to make a work for little money. And that's not good for an industry. But I'm positive, remember that. That's experience also. That's the amount of experience that an industry needs, because industry will stand up at top of that experience.
But how do you, okay, one thing is the production. The other thing, of course, is the distribution and the exhibition.
Yeah.
And as you said before, I can't remember what the percentage was, but 90% or more of the films on Ecuadorian... 98%.
But in the last year, 99.7%. It got worse. It got worse.
US films.
Yep.
So what can the state do? What needs to be done to change that? I mean, I remember many years ago I began a postdoctoral thesis on, a postgraduate thesis on Brazilian cinema, which I never finished, but that's not important. But I remember back in the 1970s, ironically during the military dictatorship, Brazil adopted very stringent quota system. So I think, you know, 1 out of every 3 films shown in the Brazilian cinema had to be Brazilian. Every foreign film had to be accompanied by a Brazilian short. And there were sort of serious protectionist measures, if you like, to protect the market. Is that what's needed now?
It could be, but nowadays I'm not absolutely sure if it still works. It happened in the last century, definitely. It happened in Bolivia. It was also a nationalist military government that helped create the Bolivian cinema. As you say, it happened in Brazil, it happened in Mexico, definitely. In Venezuela in the 1970s, it happens. Yeah, something has to be done, and eventually it could be with that idea that quotas. Yeah, but not necessarily. Not necessarily.
What's
because
the alternative?
Most probably it has to be a mixture. Because, for instance, nowadays, every single Ecuadorian film that has been produced has had the audience through the cinemas, through the commercial films, commercial audiences, commercial cinemas, commercial distribution. So every single film has had that opportunity. But the problem is that the viewers don't go.
What do you do? Because they don't like the films? Because they don't know about the films?
Because they don't feel that cinema is the cinema they want to see. Because
they want to see Fast and Furious?
Yeah. Our audience is accustomed to the North American films. It's a taste. It's a matter of taste. That's the cinema they want. And we need to do some kind of film that, in a way, is related with that, without trashing our cultural heritage. It's a complex thing.
A sort of Ecuadorian version of Black Panther, you know, a sort of Ecuadorian superhero.
We have to start working with those archetypes. At Ecuadorian cinema, it's too naturalist. It's like documentary film, in a way. And the audience doesn't want to see that. They want action, movement, passion. It's a problem. Money definitely supports. For instance, state-owned TV chains must invest in Ecuadorian production, and they don't.
What about outside of the cinemas themselves? Because obviously many people now are watching their cinema on streaming services. I mean, cinema audiences I think are still standing up quite well, but still a lot of people consume their films on their laptops, on their computers, even on their telephones. You know, so what does Ecuadorian cinema need to get into that kind of exhibition?
My point of view, to higher the production standards. In production values, and in production values mainly, what North Americans call production values. So you see a North American film and you see production values. You see that photography is working to heighten the dramatic conflict, let's say, and the art directing has all the resources well placed. It has resources in the screen and in the speakers. Higher the production standards.
Last year, I think, saw the first Ecuadorian film in Quechua, with actors speaking Quila, now
Alberto Muenala,
or Antes de que salga la luna. No, in English that would be what? Before the moon comes out. Yeah?
You saw it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that just a curiosity, or does it signify something?
You mean the name or the film?
The film. The film.
Let's say we speak about the same film. It's the film of the photographer, the Quechua photographer, the Otavalo photographer.
Yes.
That gets in love with a mestizo woman.
Yes.
And there's this conflict with the government. A very interesting film. I made a very supportive critic of the film. But let's start with the numbers. That film made 1,300 viewers in commercial cinemas.
I went to see it in a commercial center, Recreo. I think there were 3 of us in the audience. My partner, myself, and somebody else.
1,300. Can you imagine that? It's a film that costed only in cash, maybe around $100,000, plus the work of Alberto Muenala and his crew for 8 years. There's no relation between the production costs and the audience. Yeah, we need to recover the investments if we want to be an industry.
But is that again because the audience just doesn't want to see that kind of thing?
Definitely yes. Definitely yes. You know that our country has a complex relation between cultures. And I compare that we are in a position like the United States in the 50s and the 60s, when white European heritage and the African heritage started to speak to each other, to dialogue, to recognize each other. It was the decade of the civil rights for the black Afro-Americans. We are like in that situation. Yeah, we are starting a dialogue between the European culture and the Andean culture, the Quechua culture. Yeah, and that film shows that our audience, which is mainly a mestizo audience, is not very in the position to see a different film just because it's different, only because it's a Quechua film. No, it's not enough. It's not enough. It needs to be a film with high production standards.
Camilo, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ian.
We've been talking to Camilo Luzuriaga about the state, the growth, but still the big problems facing cinema here in Ecuador. Thank you so much for watching. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Ian Bruce. Until next time.